Hey everyone, welcome back to The Leadership Project with your host Mick Spears. Our vision is to inspire all leaders to challenge the status quo. We bring you weekly topics and thought-provoking guests to get you to stop, reflect, and think about what it means to be a leader in a modern world. Our aim is to help you become the leader you wish you always had, as we learn together and lead together. Today's episode is brought to you by my new book, You're a Leader, Now What? The Proven Path to High-Performance Leadership. The book contains many of the great lessons that we've been learning together during the Leadership Project podcast, together with many other lessons that I've collected over my 30-year career as a leader. The book is aimed at first-time leaders, but really there's lessons in there for everyone. It would be greatly appreciated if you could go and grab your copy on Amazon as either an ebook or a paperback, and if you could leave us an honest review on Amazon. Now, on with the show. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Leadership Project. I'm greatly honored today to be joined by Jonathon Hensley. Jonathon is the co-founder and CEO of Emerge, an organization that focuses on digital products and how digital products come to life. He's also the author of a book called Alignment, which is all about how internal sabotage can impact the success of digital product launch. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. We're going to talk a little bit about design thinking. We're going to talk a little bit about his core skill in more than 2 decades of work in this digital product space. But the key leadership lesson here is all about this alignment. And why is it that so many digital products, or any product for that matter, does fail? And what are some of the workings that lead to that around alignment, around what he calls internal sabotage? So very excited today about the interview. Jonathon, please do take some time now to say hello to our audience and give us a little bit more about that extensive 2 decades plus experience in this area and what led you to be with us today.
Absolutely. Well, first off, Mick, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's an absolute honor to be here with you and all of your listeners. I have had the fortune of being in the digital space for, as you mentioned, more than 20 years. And I fell into it almost really by accident, but really from a place of passion. I grew up in Silicon Valley in the heart of San Francisco, and I was surrounded by incredible innovators, thinkers that were using technology to change the way that people were living and working. And then I come from a family of psychologists. And so these two things intersected and began a lifelong passion of understanding how technology and changes and shapes human behavior. And that set me on a path that led eventually into digital product and digital transformation for organization to help them understand how their behaviors and the behaviors and needs of their customers result in creating incredible products and services.
That's a really interesting balance there. So I was reading in all of your works and your bio, et cetera, that, you were one of those what would you call it, a nerd at heart, or one of those geeky people that would go around trading computer parts. And tell us about those days, like when you're kind of almost, I get this impression, maybe it's Hollywood movies have given me this impression, but this impression of people just building things in their garage and tinkering around just because they found it interesting. Is that what it was like? Tell us about those days.
In many ways, when I started off, it was very much like that. I think the movies in some ways have captured that, a small piece of it in a fairly, decent way. I mean, I grew up, going and getting parts from, computer groups and learning how to write software before I was even a teenager, just from the insatiable curiosity of wanting to understand how things work. And then I think, children have this fascination with anything that they find interest in and building that connection. And so that is really something that, for me was incredibly powerful to be able to connect with at a very early age. And one of the beautiful things about Silicon Valley at the time was that they made that so accessible. It didn't matter about your age and, what walk of life you're coming from. If you were curious and interested in technology, there was a place for you and you were brought into that. I remember going to user group meetings and all of a sudden there'd be somebody with two, doctorates sitting there talking about how they've helped launch satellites into space. And here I am, a little kid, who's just looking at this person in awe and just wanting to be a sponge, and them taking me under my wing and saying, okay, well, you know what, here's a few parts that's left over from this last project it worked on, or, here's how you do this. And the patience and the commitment to build community during that time was just incredible. And I think it just lit this insatiable passion. What you do when you are in technology is you find a way to give and collaborate as much as possible. And that was really the spirit of the community that I was able to be a part of at such a young age.
Yeah, you've used the word community there a few times, and that was exactly the word that was popping into my mind. Surrounding yourself with other people that are like-minded, that willingness to co-create, that willingness to give, not so much competitive. And maybe the big companies are a little bit more competitive now, and they're a lot more secretive, and they get in their kind of campuses and buried down in and maybe protect their intellectual property a little bit more. But that environment of co-creation and just that willingness to support each other. How much has it changed since those days, do you think?
Well, at least from my perspective, I think it's changed significantly. I think the community is still there, but it's just a very different type of community. One, it's much, much bigger than it was, 20 plus years ago, 25 years more. It's also the sharing has become much more finite in many areas. And it depends on what parts, you're playing in, but the stakes are a lot higher than they were back then. You weren't having this mix of hobbyists and professionals and innovation taking place at the scale and the pace that it was. In comparison, now you have these enormous companies that hold very significant interests in where these technologies go. At the time, I don't think anybody could even really imagine or fathom. Maybe a handful did, but the type of community is just very shifted. And I find it to be now, it's also much more specific. Now we have entire industries that support that kind of community and collaboration that never existed before because it was in its infancy. I mean, the technologies and the things that, we get to use today, 25 years ago, maybe hadn't even been invented yet.
Yeah, right. I guess there's still some of it, like things like GitHub, or there's other tools where a lot of these developers do still share amongst each other more digitally now, I guess. So rather than go and meet each other in each other's garage and share parts or go to talks like you were going to, maybe it's a little bit more digital than it was before. There's still an element of that sharing, but then there's commercial interests that come in that I guess would make that finite nature that you spoke about.
What is really wonderful is just the amount of opportunity there is, I think, more than ever to actually get mentorship and to really be able to connect with people in these areas. And, broadly, like just the landscape of design thinking has evolved so tremendously in comparison to where we were to where we are today and the capabilities of what you can even produce. And so being able to find that kind of access, it's not that part of the community has really actually, I think, grown all for the better, because a lot of the information that the heart of that community, they've embraced it online and they've really democratized this information to really grow and educate and expand and support one another. And many of the people that I work with and are fortunate enough to know, their entire goal is to how do they level everyone up? How do they bring them all up together through these capabilities or new technologies? And that's still part of the community that I never can get enough of. And I'm still in awe of the people that make up the community.
That's amazing, Jonathon. That's where I was thinking about that world of co-creation, that it's when you create that space and you create those platforms, and I could use the word platform generically, and then of course, you'll probably talk about digital platforms as we progress, that co-creation space where the collective can bring something into existence that individuals couldn't possibly, but by learning and bouncing off each other, there is absolutely no doubt that that environment that you grew up in, I'm going to say, has changed the world forever. There's absolutely no doubt about that. And I think if it wasn't for that community spirit and that sharing, it would never have reached the heights that it has done so. Or if it did, it would take a lot longer than what it has done in our lifetime, Jonathon. The world has changed irreversibly because of digital transformation.
Yeah.
You touched on design thinking there for a bit. So I want to pivot now back to the other thing that you said that got my interest, which was you grew up in a family of psychologists, and two things immediately pop into mind. One is the psychology of the digital product in the first place. So how do you bring that product to life in a way that connects to the users and actually does something that transforms their lives? And then the other one is the psychology of the team environment. But I would love to hear your views about what you learn from being in a family of psychologists that helps you to be successful today.
Well, I think one of the most fundamental aspects of growing up in a family where that, is practiced and talked about is, one, the important skills of having empathy for users. And empathy is a foundational element to design thinking. And so being able to have exposure to that outside of the design practice, but from a psychology practice and around, as a young person exposed to adults who are out there in the world and practicing these skills and are trained psychologists to, help people and really develop acute listening skills and ways of making connection with people that you can start to understand their situation through that empathetic lens. That was incredibly powerful to get introduced to that at such a young age and then be able to take that through my own career and into the world of product. And so that has its, now basis in great leadership, in great design thinking, in being able to create things like product market fit. They're all rooted in this psychological foundation of empathy. And one aspect of empathy that's really important is understanding that you brought up the team dynamic, and this kind of umbrella concept of alignment. And so from an empathetic standpoint, we think about it intellectually many times, but when we think about alignment and that empathy is a component of being able to create and build alignment, and it's a requirement, it's also now been proven by scientists and in neuroscience that there's also a biological need, that alignment is also a critical component of being able to bring people together and fulfill this biological desire of understanding cause and effect. And so through that, now we know it's not just a practice, it's actually an innate architecture of human beings to want to create alignment in their lives. And through that, one of the tools is empathy, where they build connection. And so understanding that, being able to peel that apart and really look at that through, well, if I'm a leader, what does that mean? If I'm a designer, what does that mean? If I'm trying to, champion and build a team or a culture that can produce great products, what does that mean? You start to recognize that there's some practices and there's some patterns and some really critical tools to empower individuals at every level. And so that understanding has really been profound in my career and the work that I do today.
There's two really key things that are popping into my mind there, Jonathon. The first one about empathy, and I think we'll unpack both of these as we go. So the first one about empathy is that without customer empathy of the end user who's going to use the product, this is when we end up in situations where you have these very innovative products that come to market that no one actually needed, right? So, and there's probably, we could probably spend an entire week talking about some of those product failures where, it was really fun to build or really cool, but no one actually really needed it, and it didn't fill a gap or it didn't fill a need or whatever the case may be. And then that second part, when you're talking about the human need, it comes down to that need for love and belonging, which I'd like to explore with you as the interview progresses, that need for love and belonging can either be something that drives virtuous behaviors or sometimes maybe some behaviors that hold us back. But I'd like to come back to that one for sure. So let's unpack the key topic of today then, and that is about why so many digital transformations or digital products fail. So let's get started, Jonathon. What do you believe is at the heart of that?
Well, I think at the very heart of it is this idea of alignment, or in the case of failure, is misalignment. And oftentimes failure is attributed to poor team performance or a lack of market fit. And while these are accurate answers, when you start to really unpack them, there was misalignment that happened prior to that step in the process, or that level of maturity in the transformation or in the product development life cycle that led to that outcome. And so I think the aspects that gets talked about are really important. It's an important, thing to recognize. But what I think is even more profound and important is when you can step back and say, well, what is the precursors to that failure? Mm-hmm. What are the things that if we understand and become consciously aware of, that now we can start to take actions to navigate more effectively so we have a higher potential of success in our businesses and our products and in our lives. And so this idea of alignment is really the foundation of, I think people have to really understand. And I mean, whether you're the CEO or founder of a company or you're working in a team, it is one of the most important concepts that I think is easily overlooked.
So tell us more what alignment means to you. It's an easy word, and I think most people in the audience would have their own definition of alignment. But when you come to this area of product development, what's the Jonathon Hensley definition of alignment?
So I actually think because the definition is too broad individually, I look at it at 4 levels. So the first level is individual alignment, meaning everybody in the organization or on a product team understands how their work matters, why you're doing what you're doing, and how it makes a difference, how it makes an impact to the success of achieving the product vision or the strategy that you've set forth in what you're doing. The second one is team alignment. And that really boils down to how do you build alignment between individuals? How do you integrate their unique disciplines, their life experiences, and their expertise to be able to solve problems effectively and to really be able to collaborate to generate that outcome that you want? The third one is organizational alignment. Is the organization in alignment with the resources and its strategic direction in order to support the team in solving those problems in an effective way? And then fourth is, are you in alignment with the market? Is there something that you're actually providing value to your ideal target customer in a way that is desirable and will engage that audience effectively? And so part of that market fit that sometimes is worthy pulling apart is to say that there's 2 facets to that fit that have to be met, that team is responsible for producing. And one is the functional needs of the problem that's being solved, and the other is the psychological need that problem is solving. So you might solve the problem in one way, but psychological value is not being created, and so it doesn't work. And that's also what can breed incredible competition and innovation when you understand that, because it creates opportunities to solve the same problem in powerful and unique and differentiating ways that allow us to have such thriving landscape in the product industry.
There's lots more there that I'd like to unpack as well, Jonathan. I'm starting to feel like we could definitely talk for a week and we wouldn't fully explore this topic. So I'll just summarize that a little bit and say, okay, so the individual needs alignment. So everyone wants to feel that they matter. So they want to feel that what they do when they turn up every day, that what they're doing aligns to the bigger vision or the bigger picture of what the team and what the organization is trying to create. The team alignment to make sure that there's cohesion, that it's those individuals are now working in a cohesive manner. The organizational alignment to make sure that it's structured the right way and the resources are applied in the most efficient way. And then the market alignment, that you're producing something that people actually need. And I love what you said about it's not just a physical need, it could be a psychological need that's looking to be addressed. And we might, if we got time, we might come back to that one as well. Okay, so this is the leadership project. Where do you start? So if you're in an organization, let's go with a startup. So if you're in a startup and you've got a small team that's still finding their feet and exploring the world, how do they start with alignment?
Well, I think first off, it requires an organization, especially a startup, to have a clear understanding of what problem are they solving? Why do they exist? I mean, it's not some generic or touchy-feely question. And in the sense, it is very much, you have started a company for a very specific reason. And is it clear? And there's many companies, and it's why so many companies fail, that are missing the foundational element of what is the purpose of this company? Why does this company exist? What problem does it solve? What value is it creating? And I don't mean people who have had, as they would talk about in the book E-Myth, like an entrepreneurial seizure. They've decided they want to become, they're creating their own business. I mean, somebody who's really thought through beyond just becoming somebody who's going to take a skill they took somewhere else and just they want to be that solo entrepreneur, but they're building a company. They have to understand what the purpose of that is. And so it starts foundationally right there. Are you clear about the problem you solve and the value that you're going to create or are creating for people? And so that's really foundational. 2, are you aligned to an actual market need and demand? And then as you build your team, you need to start clearly identifying what each person's roles and responsibilities are and how they align to that purpose and how they align to creating that value. And so that really, at the most basic level, is where you need to start. As an organization matures or as a company gets bigger, you can really find that the cornerstones of alignment can be built on by understanding what good strategy is. And I think that's one of the challenges that a lot of very large scale businesses deal with as much as startups, but is their definition of strategy is skewed, has been maybe misguided or misinformed. And they don't really have a good way to assess strategy to say, is this strategy a good strategy or not? And so those aren't really skills that are discussed nearly as much as they should be. But the foundational elements of strategy are one of the most powerful set of tools you could possibly have to building alignment.
So tell us more about that. So if you were to give a very short summary of what you think makes a good strategy, what would be those fundamental tenets?
I guess I'll first give you the definition of what I consider to be great strategy. So I think a great strategy defines the value you're going to create in a succinct and tangible way, where to focus and why, and the approach you're going to take to realize that vision or that strategic value. So, and that is broken into 5 pillars or foundational elements. So the first one is the actual vision for the product. And sometimes the product and the company are the same if you're a startup, especially. And so what's your long-term goal? What's the destination? 5 years from now, you want to achieve what? What does that look like? Is it measurable? Is it tangible? Is it something that people can understand? Because a lot of times we see and we're told that strategy, or we confuse them with goals. and action plans and ambition. And, oh yeah, our strategy, year over year growth, 100%, we're good to go. And it just doesn't work like that. And so there has to be this clarity of where we're going so that everybody in the organization, whether you're 2 people or 2,000 people, can say, oh, this is where we're headed. And I can understand how we're going to measure that and why, versus saying, I want to be the best company of ABC in 10 years. Well, how do we measure best? What does best even mean? We have to define those things clearly and articulately when we're creating great strategy. So that would be the first pillar. The second one is, do we understand the challenge that we're solving? And so that is encompassing of what's the current state of the situation, or why are you creating this product or offering to begin with? And then who's the customer? How does this impact that customer? And this goes back to empathy, understanding somebody's problems. What do they need to, to find you, to connect with you, to understand the value you're creating? That you have to understand that current landscape and that problem space in order to really effectively do that. The third part is understanding outcomes. And so when I talk about outcomes, a lot of times you'll hear about in design thinking, we're customer centric. And so they talk about the customer outcome. And then you have other organizations that don't talk about the customer at all, and they talk about the business outcome. And the reality is you should be talking about both. And they're intertwined to one another. So we should never divorce the two. We need to understand, after we understand a vision and where we're going, after we understand the challenge, the problem that we're going to solve and for who, not the solution, but the actual scope of that problem and how it impacts people, then we can start to look at outcomes. What's the outcome, let's say 6 months from now, near term, or 12 months from now? And for the customer, what's that, the business? And that gives us a lens that helps us understand, well, if we start to solve the problem effectively, we should be able to hit this near-term outcome. And is it moving us forward to our vision? Right. So that's a built-in quality assurance check, if you will, in strategy to help make sure that we're coordinating these attributes correctly. Then we get into the fourth pillar, which is really focused on the approach. And the approach is, there might be 20 or 30 ways you can solve a problem. And that's totally okay. But which problem can you solve, and how can you solve it with your own insight and perspective and in an effective way? So you have to understand, where are you going to prioritize? And so when you start to focus on the solution space, you need to start to understand strategically where you're going to focus in that space and what your constraints are. And if you don't understand those constraints, I can't go solve a problem like a company like IBM can. I don't have those resources, but I might be able to think of an innovative way to solve and take an approach that will generate the same outcome, but because I could think about it differently. And those are real factors we have to have embedded into our strategy. And then the fifth overall is making sure that we have a way that we're going to track progress. What's the metric or the measurement that we will have, not towards the end result, but clearly how will we track that incremental progress along the way? And that is an incredible, powerful set of tools when you think about creating alignment as a founder or a leader or as part of a team, because now everybody can understand, I'm helping solve this problem. I bring unique disciplines and expertise, and I'm going to have different ideas than she is and then he is. And that's wonderful, because now we're going to come together and we're going to explore those possibilities. But we know it has to be produced within these kinds of the solutions within these constraints. So we're going to take this approach to this area, or out of the scope of this problem, there's 20 things that need to be solved. But if we solve these 3 things, we can create so much value for customers. We can change the way that they live. Now we have a way to orient and making sure that we could start to look at how we can make impact. And so those are all precursors to starting to develop better products, building that alignment, that eventually does find market fit and creates that value in the real world.
So the summary I'm taking from all of that, Jonathon, is making sure that you are addressing some kind of need, that there is a need for, and you're creating value, and there's some kind of need for what you're doing, and that it aligns to some kind of need that a customer needs, but then every single person in the organization knows how they're contributing to that. And then having that ability to track your strategy towards that ultimate goal, not around goals as in measurable goals that we spoke about, but that ultimate vision of the world that you're trying to create and the problem that you're trying to solve. All right, thank you for that. You talk a lot about internal sabotage. What does internal sabotage mean?
Well, one of the things that I mentioned this earlier is when you think about failure or why a company may be underperforming or their product is underperforming, a lot of times it's not because there's not this market fit, but something that happened either earlier in the process or something that's continuing to happen and the company is struggling. And so in my work, I've had the benefit of, interviewing hundreds and hundreds of people to understand how have you beaten the odds. I've interviewed people, and it's like consistently through their careers, and they've been able to beat the odds and succeed again and again and again. And this theme of alignment always shows up in those that have that successful track record. Underneath that, there's an innate understanding of some critical causes of failure that they've become experts in navigating. And they're really important, I think, to understand. And so here's just a couple of examples, and we can dive into any one of them. But one is not knowing who your customer really is. I think this one is more intuitive to most people. They're like, I get that. If I don't have a clearly defined customer, if I say everybody's my customer, that's probably a problem, because I'm generically shooting for the world without making sure that I understand who I can create the most value for. The other one is managing expectations. Expectations is such a huge thing where, sometimes optimism can be mistaken as a promise. And so expectations management is very different when it's coming from someone who's been promoted into a position of leadership versus somebody in a team who's working across functions of a company. And so expectations management is a really tricky thing. And people don't like to deliver bad news. And so with expectations management comes the courage to have brutal honesty. And that is difficult for a lot of people that are trying to support a team environment. Another one is underestimating organizational complexity or scale. And so this one is another common thing that causing the sabotage and underestimation of what the real level of effort is going to be to effectively solve a problem or bring it to market. And I'll just highlight two others. One is also skipping steps. And the next one is siloed knowledge. And all of these are never, or rarely should I say, have I ever seen people do them intentionally. And so that's the thing about internal sabotage. It's not done consciously by any one person, but it tends to just organically happen out of not understanding that these are areas where sabotage starts in creating the impact that you want with your products and services. And so when we can start to understand these things, we have such a stronger chance of success if we understand what they are, how to navigate them, and build in steps to promote success for the team as we go forward.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I really believe that I'm sure there's going to be some exceptions that you'll eventually come across in your career, but I don't think anyone shows up to work on any day, whether they're a horrible boss or someone that's just got some alignment issues, as you would call it, Jonathon. I don't think anyone turns up to work going, I'm going to do a bad job today, but they have their blind spots and some of the things that you're pulling up are around blind spots. You also mentioned a lot about high levels of candor. Tell us more about that and about the psychological safety that you need in a team to give people the ability to speak up.
So I'm gonna tackle this from two different vantage points. One goes back to empathy. There is, if you can empathize with the person you're providing feedback to, it's an incredibly powerful tool in making sure that you provide constructive feedback. You can be extremely clear, and some people are challenged where they think being direct is being critical. And so as you think about the culture you want to create or that you have in your organization, you get to make a choice as a leader of how you want to provide. And you actually hit on the key word, safety, to have that open dialogue. And so I think understanding empathy, where if you recognize and first really try to understand where the other person is coming from. If, let's say, they made a mistake, it wasn't intentional. What didn't happen? Was it because they didn't get the proper training? They don't have the proper experience. No one shared with them critical information in a timely fashion. So they weren't really set up to succeed to begin with, if that happened. What were the dynamics? And I think that leaders have to take that into account, is what is the situation, and versus criticizing the outcome, because the outcome may have nothing to do with their actual individual contribution. And so I think leaders, when they have to be really honest, it's not just how they provide that candor to someone, it's the honesty in themselves to evaluate the situation and provide critical thinking to the context of what they're communicating about. And I think that's best done when it comes from a place of being empathy and being really honest about that.
Yeah. So I like the self-reflection there and the learning mindset that, and things don't go right every day, right? So, but that ability to unpack it and go, okay, well, what did just happen there? What went well? What didn't go well? What could we do differently next time? What were the underlying circumstances that led to something that was a failure of some descriptions, whether it's a big failure or a small failure? How do we unpack it so that we don't repeat the mistakes of the past? But doing so, I'm going to add a word here, very objectively and unemotively, not about the people, but about, okay, well, what did we miss here? And what do we need to do more of next time? What do we need to do less of next time? I'm liking that kind of learning cycle that you're talking about there, Jonathon, for sure.
I could not agree more. And I think the second part is when we start to make assumptions. This is where this things can really, really break down. And because from my vantage point, what I see and is my truth, and what you see from your point of view is your truth. Two truths don't mean it's reality. And so we have to really be able to step back, as we engage with people. And many times what I find is that there are just a fundamental piece that leaders have not taken responsibility for that they need to. And I find this to be a very systemic issue where I see an underperforming organization. It's in almost every situation that I've encountered, which is, as you build an organization or you're in an industry, there's a certain vocabulary, a certain nomenclature of how you talk, shortcuts and little acronyms that get used all the time. And so one of those as an example is customer experience in the product world. It's used in marketing. It's used in leadership meetings. It's used everywhere these days. But does every single person in the organization actually know what customer experience means? And so it's not enough that they know or the terminology. What's most important is that everyone in the organization who's working together on that customer experience has a shared understanding of the definition. And that is actually where you start to see this incredibly powerful thing that when leaders take responsibility for, can just transform the performance of an organization. Because once people start to really have a shared understanding, they bring collective competency to the surface with focus they can collaborate, and they can work faster. And you start to see a lot of the challenges that organizations and leaders are struggling with around how we keep having to rework this problem. Why can't we get past this solution? This isn't what I expected. I mean, there's all these reasons that always come up. Oh, we're trying to be agile. I love that one these days. And it's the reality is you didn't stop and slow down and to make sure there was a shared understanding of the goals, making sure that the vision was clear, making sure that the tasks you needed them to complete were clear. And oftentimes it can be as simple as having a conversation and saying, what did you hear when I said that?
Yeah.
That's it. That's all it has to take, is just this pausing and stop trying to be as efficient with people as many of us can do from, unintentionally, and just ask, what did you hear? And if they can mirror that back to you, you can just instantly do a self-assessment. Yes or no, are we in alignment? And that is when you can start to look at that from one-to-one interactions, and then to teams, and then to functions in a business, and then cross-functionally or global companies. It is such a powerful and underestimated amplifier of value and productivity. And it helps create connection, quite candidly. I've seen moments where you have an HR leader and a product leader and the CEO debating, everything. And all of a sudden, once they have a shared understanding, the debate falls away, right? It's not, oh, I get that now. Well, this is how I can contribute to that. And this is how I can contribute to that. And this is now how we can move forward. And that reconciliation process, that time that leaders need to invest into building, and not just building, but maintaining that common language and common understanding, is, I think, one of the just key leadership disciplines that needs to be embedded at every level of a company and for everybody who aspires to be a leader as they grow in their career.
There's two really powerful things there, Jonathon, I want to summarize. So that point about perspective, right? So everyone looking at the same thing and seeing their view of the same thing. And it's their truth is true for them, right? So it's their reality. I love that. So that there's a level of cognitive empathy there to be able to look at whatever it is, the object or the problem that you're looking at, and to be able to look at it second loop and third loop thinking and looking at it from different angles and build that cognitive empathy along the way. Probably some emotional empathy as well, so that you're not just seeing what they see, but you're also feeling what they feel. But then the second level of that is, and I don't think we do this near enough, is asking better questions and testing assumptions. So there would be countless examples of people that go into meetings and everyone walks away with a different understanding of what just happened. And just to ask those powerful questions at the end to go, what did you see there? Or what did you feel? Or what did you take away from this? To test those assumptions so that you don't have the opposite of alignment, which is that divergence where everyone's working hard. They all believe that they're working towards the same vision and the same goal, but they might have walked away from a meeting with a different understanding of what on earth just happened. Right? Really powerful. I want to come back to the psychological need inside the team, because you touched on this earlier, and I think it is something to explore a bit further. We spoke about love and belonging. So you said that alignment and this need to belong in the team and have a role in the team, et cetera, is also a psychological need. Tell us more about why that is important and where it can go wrong.
So when it goes wrong, let's start there, because I think that's a pretty easy one. You have a situation where ego can be a negative and a positive thing to a certain degree. And without getting into a giant talk about ego, when you think about somebody's ego and then they shut down, they stop listening. And when we think about alignment and psychological connection and belonging, what we're doing is we're creating a space for vulnerability. And it starts to break down people's egos and allows them to be their most genuine self. And so we want to shift especially the organizations, when we think about things like collaboration or innovation, and these things become buzzwords, but there's so much powerful meaning to them if we get away from the hype surrounding them, to understand that if we're focusing on alignment, we can shift it from a why me to why we. Why do we need to do this? And it starts to promote that conversation that you just mentioned about asking better questions. And we start to create a space of belonging. Well, why do we need to do this? How do we do this? Versus that I, or the ego that gets in the way of the connection with others. And so the psychological value of alignment is profound, because we're addressing both a biological need and a psychological need simultaneously, and then connecting it to the purpose of why that organization exists. And I think that's really important when we think about how we promote and create the environments for high performance teams, and how we create an environment of safety for mistakes, and understanding what kind of mistakes are okay for me to make, and what are the kinds of mistakes I don't have the life experience yet to say that I can take that risk individually, but I'm empowered through my organization to engage my peers so we can make a collective choice. And so that purpose, that understanding of that psychological, space is just fundamental to, building these high performance organizations.
I think two levels of connection there. They're connected to the purpose, which was really good. And what I'm hearing from you also, Jonathon, is connected to each other, so that you build that we environment instead of the I environment. Yeah, really good. I want to come back to the customer experience now. You touched on something really interesting there. You said that everyone in the organization needs to know what customer experience is. But I think you're also, to build on that, I think you're also talking about everyone needs to understand what the customer experience is that your organization is trying to strive for. So it's not just, I know what customer experience is, but they all have a view. So if you're a luxury brand, everyone in the organization knows that you're trying to achieve a luxury experience. And if you're more about efficiency, where in our product, the user should be so intuitive that they never have to make more than 2 clicks to do anything in their software product, or whatever the case may be. Not just understanding what customer experience is, but what is the experience that you're striving for, and that will influence people's decisions along the way. The bit I want to unpack came all the way back from, I think, very early in the interview. You said that the customer has psychological needs, not just needs. And we've kind of explored that a lot in the world of marketing in the last couple of decades, where we now know so much more about buying decisions. We know that people make decisions emotionally and they justify it rationally. And we've seen a lot of very, very successful companies pivot their marketing to address that. So their marketing is very emotional. Tell us more, though, about how you factor in that emotional need or the psychological need into product design.
Candidly, it's everything in great product design. I think let's just use 2 brands. And to be clear, anybody listening, I don't work with these companies, so they're just examples. But Volvo as a car brand, right? There's a bunch of different car manufacturers out there. They all produce vehicles that get you from point A to point B. It's so the functional needs. I mean, there are little features and things that are really important to certain markets, but generally speaking, the function of the car is relatively the same. What's different? It's the psychological value. Volvo is known for safety, right? That's a really, really critical thing to a very specific audience. Somebody who has a family or maybe is caring for others, safety might be the most important thing that connects with their values and their needs for a vehicle. And so it doesn't mean that another manufacturer like Toyota doesn't make an incredibly safe car. They do. But Toyota's psychological value is not anchored to that for their customer. To them, that's table stakes of producing a quality product. they're anchored to something different. And that's why both companies can be wildly successful within that same industry in their own way. So when we think about psychological value in a product, no matter what the product is, we're trying to really understand is what do we need to do there? So going back to the customer experience piece specifically, when we start to understand that value, in addition to how that psychological need that creates value, if realized, what we can do is we can start to design very specific attributes or ways of delivering that product or service to highlight that far beyond the marketing message. So if I'm looking for that, I'm going to really hone in on what are the attributes of the product? What are the mechanisms that I need to do to reinforce an idea of safety? What are the things for, a company like Apple that's focusing on how am I going to reinforce the mechanisms and the psychological value of innovation? If you're Southwest Airlines, it's about, love. That was the core of their brand, to change and disrupt the airline industry. So you build these in, and they're not taglines. They're not marketing gimmicks. They're literally built into the essence of the product, and they are foundational in their strategy. And so that starts to inform entire design patterns and definitions. In order to help illustrate that maybe a little bit better, let's talk about the customer experience definition itself in an organization, and why I had said earlier why it's so important everybody has a shared understanding of it. You can argue pretty easily that everybody in an organization is there to create lifetime customer value in any type of business. We all exist in some form or function to bring our skills into that business to generate that result. If we do that, shareholders are happy, founders are happy, doesn't matter what the size of the company is. If you go into many organizations and you go into the different functions, they will start to tell you different narratives of who the customer is. And this goes back to that shared understanding challenge. Marketing will talk about them one way, product people will talk about them another, finance will talk about their customers, the people that pays the bills, which may be totally different than the end user. That's a problem. And the reason is because the entire organization needs to be aligned around the idea of who the customer is and who the company exists to serve. These other parties involved are part of serving that customer. And so that's where organizational friction develops very quickly or becomes very overly complicated and complex. I say all this coming back to customer experience, and not to make this more complex for anybody listening, but I think it's important to understand that then once everybody understands customer experience and how they can contribute, we can design more effective processes and experiences for those customers. And so now it's not just marketing. It's marketing understands their role in the customer experience. Product understands their role in the customer experience. Finance understands their role in the customer experience. The support team understands their role in the customer experience, because customer experience is the sum of that individual's experiences, impressions, and interactions with that brand. And so now the organization's knowledge, understanding, and structure is in alignment with their intended outcome. And for some organizations, maybe for the first time.
Yeah.
And so design can be transformative once you understand that foundation. And then you can start to really look at the nuances, which we could also talk about, that of designing the very specific moments and key elements that bring that to life.
Yeah, really good. And it comes, once again, we're circling all the way back to the word alignment again. And we can see there this kind of that view that everyone in the organization knows what problem you're trying to solve, but everyone in the organization knows what customer experience you're trying to achieve and how that impacts then your brand, because your brand is what other people say it is. It's not what you say it is. It's how they experience your products and your company, what ends up being what your brand ends up being known as. Really good. And I got to tell you, this is quite funny. A very good friend of mine, Jim Rowan, he used to play tennis with him in Singapore, has just been appointed as the CEO of Volvo. and he listens to the show. So he's going to be listening to this going, thank you very much, Jonathan. That is exactly what they stand for and everything they do. And come back to the emotion again for a moment. I want to come back to product design and emotion in a second as well. But the emotion for this point about decision making, someone that buys a Volvo will rationalize that decision and tell you all the features of the car. But the decision that they make is an emotional decision that their family's safety is their number one priority. And therefore, they're going to buy that car because they want to take their kids to school and drop them off safely and get them home safely and all of those things. The emotion in design, the one I want to unpack, pardon the pun, is even unboxing, right? So there's something about Apple products in particular that when you get that Apple product, yes, you're buying that Apple product because you need a phone, right? And you need a smartphone. And to get around these days, you kind of need to be in a connected world. But there's something about the emotion, even from the moment that you start unboxing that product, you feel something. And it's not a physical need. You feel something. Tell us more about everything from packaging through to all of that. How do you, like you're a design expert, Jonathan, so how do you build that from the outset?
Well, from the outset, you have to understand that our feelings about a product, every stage in the customer journey inherits the feelings and experiences from the previous step. And so when we think about unboxing, and the unboxing experience is beautiful, simple, and then if the product was complex all of a sudden, it'd feel disingenuous. And so Apple is, just using them as the example, since you brought them up, has really, really honed in on understanding that the promise is made from the moment you choose to buy. And that promise has to be reinforced at every step. So their packaging and the simplicity of that packaging, that unboxing experience is very, very intentional to understanding that core value. Same thing when you started up your phones, charged up to a point, you can go in and it's a very simple guided, setup process. It's beautiful. It shows off a little bit of the capabilities, a little bit of the beauty of the product. It's beautifully designed and the feel in your hands. And that's extending not just from what you're physically feeling, but what's happening on the screen. And they accentuate that, and they're brilliant at that. And then they start to progressively unlock the features and capabilities of that product to help you experience the full depth of what that product can offer you. And so what Apple's doing there is they're really understanding that the value is starting to a promise of value, and how that value is delivered is happening far beyond the functional aspect, and we've talked about, and like you said, at the psychological level, and they have to start that as early as they can in the process for the customer, and they have to carry that through and reinforce that. And so when we design experiences or in products, the product, we have to think of the sum experience of how they get to the product, how they first use that product, how they onboard and develop that product over time, how they then go from an introductory user of that product to an expert user of that product. What is that progression? And that level of thinking and thoughtfulness is profound in how it changes how you design and how you think. And so some of the best products, that it's that attention to detail, you feel it. You may not be able to experience it. Like, I have no idea what the glass is made out of on my iPhone right now. I don't follow it that closely anymore, but it's amazing. And so, they think that through, and to push that innovation further, they're always thinking about that, and they're constantly designing for that next iteration, not to fall into the trap of we're just going to keep designing new features and adding new things all the time. And, hopefully you just have to like enough of it, right? They have understood that the simplicity of in their promise and their experience has been key to the success of that product and that design. Apple's also a really good example of where that's failed. And so, one of the things that happened before Steve Jobs had come back to the company is their product lines had gotten extremely complex, lots of options, lots of variability. And the first thing he did when he came back is he just started cutting product lines and he simplified it back down to the core of the business. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but you can't design that type of simplicity and powerful experience if you spread it across 50 things that all feel the same. And so he made their products special again. And I think when you understand those dynamics, you can really design those intricate moments. And depending on your promise, you're able to use different design skills to really elevate that. Like if I'm taking somebody through a multi-step process, it's such a powerful thing to be able to show people their progression through an experience. And so that's a really powerful design dynamic or design principle that in many products is missing. And so if you have a situation where users or customers will become fatigued of the process or it becomes overly complex, they may abandon the product altogether and not move it forward when all they needed to know is that there are these 3 steps you need to take or these 5 steps and compartmentalize them. And so this is where design becomes so amazing to me because it is so much in the psychology of understanding how do people make decisions? How do we not get overloaded with information? How do we create the space so I can connect with the emotional level of that Volvo or that iPhone or, and then bring me to the next step. And a lot of times we try to throw everything at people and then we get nothing. And we don't understand why. We don't understand why can they not see the value? And I'm giving them everything they could ever ask for, but they didn't ask for everything. And so design is this beautiful exercise of understanding that individual need. And then what is the maybe most important for those listening? What is the predictable behavior that we can design to connect with our core target audience? And that's the beautiful piece is we're looking for that predictive piece, because when we talk about market fit and driving scale, we have to know what we can focus on. And there are essential moments, if we identify them, that we can do that, and we can do that with intention.
That's a really nice crescendo, probably to bring us to a close as well, Jonathan, to think about, once again, what you're talking about is alignment across every department, being aligned to that view of what you're trying to create, that simplicity. And I might throw this into the show notes. There's a really good experiment that demonstrates this. It was using jam. It was 2 different jam stands, right? And one was filled with 42 different varieties of jam, and one had 3, just 3. And the one that had 42 had more traffic actually, but no one actually purchased anything. And the one that just had 3 different varieties of jam, people bought the jam and they walked away with jam in their hand. So people want to feel like they've made a choice. So giving them just one option, they don't like that because they want to feel like they've got freedom of choice. But they don't like to have 42 options to pick from and being bombarded with different things. And then you spoke about lifetime customer value. That's another thing that in the 3rd era of Apple, I'd call it, that's another thing that they've mastered then, because then once you get into that immersed experience where everything is simple and everything does work, you're happy enough to buy an iPhone, then you'll buy an Apple Watch, then you'll buy your MacBook, etc. So you do buy products from the family, but simple. It's simple. It's not so complex that there's so many different varieties and all that kind of stuff. I've learned so much from today, Jonathan. It's been really interesting. I'd like to bring us to a close now with our rapid fire round, which is the same questions that we ask to all of our guests. So the first one, what's the one thing that you know now that you wish you knew when you were 20?
Consistency is one of the most important ingredients for success. I think if I had been understood that more and how profound that really is it's the daily effort, day after day, week after week. It's one of the most powerful tools that anybody can have if they recognize that the power of what that can provide for them in their lives and their work.
Yeah, good. There's something there for all of us as well, for sure. What's your favorite book?
My favorite book right now is Hard Things About Hard Things by Ben Horowitz. It's a fantastic deep dive into the life of a CEO and leadership. I read it about once a year.
Oh, cool. Okay, very good. Nice suggestion. And what's your favorite quote, Jonathan?
My favorite quote it's a Japanese proverb, and it's vision without action is a daydream. Action without vision, though, is a nightmare.
Yeah, nice one. Very good. And very fitting with everything we've been talking about today as well. And finally, Jonathan, if people want to know more about you, about your book and about what you do, how do they get in contact with you?
If they're interested in connecting, I would encourage anybody listening to reach out to me on LinkedIn, where I do a lot of connecting and discussions with folks. Also, I would recommend visiting emergeinteractive.com. We have a ton of free resources for anybody that's interested in product development and the topic of alignment. And then, of course, also would recommend checking out the book.
Brilliant. All right. And we'll put a link to your organization, but also a link to the book in the show notes so that everyone can find that. So thank you so much again, Jonathan. It's been a great pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much. And we look forward to sharing this with the world.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute honor.
Today's episode was brought to you by my new book, You're a Leader, Now What? The Proven Path to High Performance Leadership. The book contains many of the great lessons that we have learned together here on the Leadership Project podcast, together with lessons that I've collected over my 30-year career as a leader. The book is aimed towards first-time leaders, but really there's something in there for everyone. If you would like to show your appreciation for this show, we would greatly appreciate if you were able to go and get your copy of the book on Amazon as either an ebook or a paperback, and if you could leave us an honest review on Amazon. Thank you for listening to the Leadership Project podcast at mixbeers.com. A big call out to Faris Sadek for his sound design and editing of our audio and video content, and to the whole team at TLP, Joanne Gozon, Gerald Calabo, Rika Vidanes, and my wonderful supportive wife, Say Spears, who is also our operations manager. This show would simply not be possible without you. If you've enjoyed the show, please leave us a rating and review at Apple Podcasts. You can catch the video podcast and our video of the week at the Leadership Project YouTube channel, and you can join the conversation at the Leadership Project Facebook community group. We look forward to bringing you more great content and interviews next week as we continue to learn together and lead together. In the meantime, please do take care, look out for each other, and always remember to challenge the status quo.